One of the other questions we get asked all the time, and it usually follows the first question we discussed, which was, what is a dynamic test? The second question is, so what do you actually do during a dynamic test?
It is a good question in that, to a certain extent, we tailor the actual on-farm approach to the specific situation we've got. So in some circumstances, we're looking to improve udder health, reduce mastitis and cell count. In other situations, our testing might actually be geared up to improving back-to-scan and milk quality, or sometimes people are most interested in improving their milking efficiency. And so we might take slightly different approaches in each of those individual situations. But for all of those particular farm visits, there'd be a general programme that we follow that includes most of the main features of dynamic testing. But if we focus in on the dynamic test, that's basically all of the stuff that we do within the milking parlour during milking time. And so with our dynamic testing, we've already said that that is geared up to measure the vacuum within the milking machine whilst we've got milk flowing through the system and whilst we've got real cows with real teats plugged into our clusters. And the main area that we're interested in is the vacuum dynamics right down at the business end, so right down at cow level. So when Dan or myself are setting up for a dynamic test, we're attaching a small lightweight vacuum gauge onto the cluster and using that to measure the vacuum inside the liner, both up in the mouthpiece at the top of the teat and then down in the short milk tube. And we might have different channels going to other areas as well, depending on what we're interested in investigating in that particular situation. But what we're trying to achieve is a map of the milking of each cow that passes through that cluster during that milking session. And we need to get as many cows as possible, because the more data we get, obviously the more reliable the picture is that we're taking away from that milking.
I think that one is a key. That one is a key, is having enough data that you can then turn into information to make a good decision.
Yeah.
You occasionally hear dynamic testers who walk into a parlour with a vacuum gauge and a needle and stick it in and go, yeah, that's about right. When the next cow, that might be radically different.
Yeah, for sure. So vacuum dynamics will vary hugely from cow to cow, depending on the milk flow rates of those individual cows, and also, of course, size and shape of teats. So it's really important to get a good cross-section of the herd when we're doing our dynamic measurements. And I guess the other thing as well is how we get those measurements. So in these so-called dynamic tests that some people describe to us, where someone's been hanging underneath the cow with a needle and a vacuum gauge, it's no surprise to see that we get a very different milk letdown from those cows. You can imagine just how happy or unhappy, as is the case, those cows are when they've got someone mauling around with the cluster during milking. And so it's really important as well with your dynamic test to be able to take those measurements remotely, so that as far as the cow's concerned, it's just business as usual.
Yeah.
I suppose really, Dan, that would be the mainstay of our dynamic test, is measuring as many cows as possible from the second that cluster's attached to the second that it comes off, and looking at what's happening right down at cow level. So looking at the vacuum at the top of the teat and the tip of the teat. But I suppose there's a few other measurements that we do as well. So we'll often do things like liner overpressure measurements, and these things can give us extra information as to how things like the milking liner or other areas within the parlour are performing.
And if you've got any questions, you can always get in touch. You'll have seen the link for the website, www.advancedmilking.com.
Yeah, and there's some really good resources on there as well. There's some videos which go into a bit of the detail of things like milk letdown, over milking, and some of the different features of our dynamic test. So check out our YouTube channel, check out our website, and any questions, get in touch through the website.